Make records today, but markets had been up higher before President Trump made some news on taxes, telling Reuters the following, quote, "It could lead to a lot more jobs in the United States. I certainly support a form of tax on the border." So what's going to happen is companies are going to come back here. Again, this is the president. They're going to build their factories, and they're going to create a lot of jobs, and there's no tax, end quote. Joining us now is Scott Martin, Kingsview Asset Management, a Fox News contributor, and Veronica Dagher of the Wall Street Journal. Veronica, I have to say, everybody's saying, well, it's just the importers that are against this tax. But first of all, every consumer is going to be against it once they have to pay 20% more for all the items that are imported. But also a lot of exporters have to import manufacturing equipment. That increases the cost for them. And let's get honest about it. It's a brand new tax. We want fewer taxes, not more of them. Go ahead.
Right. So when consumers see that the price of avocados or whatever their beer or whatever their favorite product goes up, they're not going to be so happy about this, especially if they also go to their favorite retailer and try to buy goods and clothes, and those prices are also jacked up too. It's not going to be a pretty scene, especially for some of those retail stocks. We've already seen pressure on those stocks. We'll continue to see pressure, especially after the president's comments today.
Scott, you know, Steve Forbes says it's very simple. Yes, the Japanese do it. Yes, the Europeans do it, have a value-added tax, was essentially what we're talking about here. But just because they screw their consumers, that doesn't mean we should do the same to our consumers, right?
Yeah, David, I'm not a big fan of following Europe and Japan these days. I mean, let's be fair, though. I mean, there's nothing I like more than drinking a couple beers, eating a couple avocados, and going and buying some clothing. But the reality is this. I'll tell you what's funny about these propositions of VAT taxes or import taxes. Our economy's not exactly built that way right now. It's not ready for this big shock that would occur with the big border adjustment tax. So things, if they do occur that way, David, need to be graduated. They need to be leaned in over time, not just a quick switch, say, for 2018.
Well, I got to say, last word on this is that they're going to have trouble finding the Republicans they need to pass this in Congress. Even if the president is pushing forward in it, a lot of resistance in Congress against this. Cheryl.
Well, you know, speaking of the White House, you know, Sean Spicer just wrapped that news conference, and he was talking taxes on a day when the president met with big names in the manufacturing sector. Blake Berman was there. He's been monitoring everything all day at the White House, and he joins us now. Headlines in particular from these CEOs, and then the border tax discussion. Big news this afternoon.
How things can change just in an instance here at the White House. Let me walk you through at least the last hour and a half here. Before the White House press briefing, I was speaking with White House officials here about that manufacturing meeting that happened earlier. And what we were told was that the border adjustment tax was talked about and that some of the manufacturers expressed their interest in favor of this, and some of the manufacturers were against this. And everything that we had been led to believe, one of the CEOs that I talked to had told me that there was really no inkling from the administration one way or another about how they might be leaning. And then all of a sudden, the press briefing happens, and Sean Spicer, the White House press secretary, starts to talk up the merits of the border adjustment tax. Kind of piqued our interest a little bit. And as that briefing was happening, flashes this Reuters story in which they interviewed the president. I believe you just read some of the quotes in which he talked up some of the potential merits of it. So all of a sudden, in about the course of an hour here, you start to get a little bit of a shift potentially toward the border adjustment tax. Take a listen here to Sean Spicer moments ago during this briefing.
We are one of only a handful of countries that doesn't tax the imports, which frankly gives a disincentive to companies to stay in the United States, to manufacture in the United States, to hire in the United States, and it tilts the field against the American worker. And so the president is looking at tax policy that encourages manufacturing and job creation in the United States.
In a follow-up, when he was asked about the Reuters story, he said the border adjustment tax would benefit workers, consumers, and the economy. David and Cheryl, to be very clear, this was not a full-throttled endorsement from the White House of the border tax adjustment. However, it is the first step, maybe, that we have seen in that direction.
And it was a shift in tone, Blake,
yes,
to your point.
yes,
Such a big shift in tone that we saw within the last 2 hours. You were there for us, Blake. Thank you very much. I want to bring back in Scott and Veronica. to react to all of this, so here's what the White House, Scott, seems to be, saying, and that if you manufacture in the United States, that brings jobs back to the United States. That's better. You don't tax those goods. They're made here. They're sold here. There's no tax. That's good for the economy. Simple idea, but does it make sense, Scott?
To a degree, Cheryl. I mean, I guess you go along that same line and say that the businesses are going to hire more workers, right? Because they're making more stuff here and therefore wages are going to go up. I believe that to a degree because competition will spark that. But initially, there is going to be a shock to the consumer that I think Donald Trump really needs to think about. And most importantly, to kind of Blake's report, listen to the CEOs of the manufacturing companies here on the impact of their business so that he can figure out exactly what he's doing with the tax.
Well, but you know what, Veronica? If I was sitting in the CEO chair right now, I would think to myself, look, my stock is up 10, 15, 20% potentially. I've got a business that could actually benefit. I've got more capital. I've got more cash. Maybe it is time for me to kind of bring things home a little bit. The only group that really could suffer, Veronica, is the retailers. They're the ones that told the president last week, please don't do this. So this could be a win-lose for some companies, but overall, this could be better for American companies.
Potentially, but to your point before, many companies bring in some of their materials to make those products, and so they would have to pay those fees. Also, the point about job creation. Well, if companies have higher costs, that job creation may not happen because their capital and their money is going to be tied up paying their workers and paying other costs related to the tax. So it's not such a black and white equation. But I think we have to keep in mind there is so much division within the Republican Party on this issue and on taxes in general that we're going to have to wait and see what actually happens. I don't think we should get too excited either way yet.
All right, that's a very good point, David. Very good.
I'm getting very excited already. Yeah. Meanwhile, Goldman Sachs is giving it another shot, pronouncing the market has reached, quote, maximum optimism. How's that phrase? And have a letdown coming, but lest we not forget, just a little over 2 short weeks ago, Goldman economists were starting to worry about President Trump. Well, in the meantime, the Dow has risen a record after record. It's up about 700 points since Goldman's last warning. So, Scott, I'm always skeptical of these economists, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, David, I love these headlines, to be honest. I thank Goldman Sachs for probably sparking another rally here in the next few weeks or months, because you just look at history. I mean, look back to irrational exuberance in the 90s. Look back to these fears about the housing market in the early to mid-2000s. Right. Yes, eventually things did correct, but those were 2-3 years ahead of prediction. So the more haters, as the kids like to say, the market has, the more it wants to go up.
I think you're right on. Veronica, we're going to have to give you another shot the next time you're on. We got to leave it at that. Scott and Veronica, a lot of breaking news. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it.
We were talking about the